So this is part 2 to my Dementium review, so if you haven't seen the first part, go back and watch it.
Sounds like a big load of not my problem, bitch!
Dementium's fanbase would have to go for 3 years till Dementium 2's release, and the wait was well worth it. Dementium 2 is literally better in just about every way when compared to the original, fixing all the problems that the original suffered from while also introducing new mechanics that would fit very well into the game. Dementium 2 starts off very similar to the first game, having us once again take on the role of William Redmore, who this time wakes up in Brightmoor Hospital 5 weeks after his surgery.
Looks good.
Oh, thank you. From there, we are taken to our cell before we zone out and find ourselves in another realm of existence, where we quickly find our first weapon before being attacked by some chest maw enemies, and witness whatever this was. After witnessing that, we will then snap and be standing outside our cell, where we are quickly attacked by security guards, to which we must fend them off using our newly found shank weapon. Dementium 2 takes roughly around 3 hours to complete in just the main story alone. As for Dementium 2's gameplay, it is similar to the Ward with some very welcomed improvements. The first major improvement that Dementium 2 has is its environments, which put the original Dementium to shame. Dementium the Ward all took place in one hospital, while Dementium 2 has a variety of different environments, such as a prison, some outdoor snowy areas, abandoned mine shafts, industrial areas, and a handful of other places. The map design is also better, and we even have a map on the lower bottom of the screen under our health bar to make navigation easier. Aside from the level design improvements, the core mechanics are pretty similar to the Ward though. Puzzles also make a return in Dementium 2, and there are probably just as many of them as there were in the first game.
Oh boy.
Next, we have the combat, which is one of the best parts of Dementium 2. Surprisingly enough, very few weapons from the first game are actually reused here. We have our nifty little shank blade, a 6-shot snub-nose revolver, a shotgun, which is one of my favorite weapons to this game, an assault rifle, a stronger dagger that we only have for a very small amount of time within the game, the bone saw, which has been completely nerfed, a boomerang key, a sledgehammer that has a cool wind-up feature, a flamethrower, which looks pretty cool, sticks of dynamite, and a nail gun, which I somehow overlooked in my first playthrough. Oops! Another cool feature of Dementium 2's combat is that you can now crouch, jump, and reload your weapon, which really helps improve the combat and also makes it a bit more challenging, as you must manually reload your weapons. This also allows you to take cover when enemies are shooting at you, and you also can jump over certain enemies' attacks. Unlike the first Dementium, you can also carry health and ammunition in your inventory for whenever you need them. So now that we've covered the weapons and shooting mechanics, let's talk about the enemies. The enemy roster to Dementium 2 is nearly twice the size of the original Dementium. The first actual enemies the game throws at us are chest maws, though they look different than they did in the Ward and are more slow and clumsy. Then there are security guards, which are human enemies that guard the prison. Molluscas, which are nasty baby worm creatures, along with swarmers and skitter enemies. Lost souls are ghost-like entities, which will lock you in a room full of enemies if you get too close to them. Banshees also make a return from the first game, as well as whalers, which are a different version of them that will spit goo at you. Then there are spitters, which are creepy, giggling enemies that roll around. Slime mines are mobile enemies that will block your path and will explode when shot at. Aerial hunters are flying enemies with bone saws attached to them that will drop molluscas when they die. And then there are reanimators, which are enemies that will come back to life unless you kill them with a flamethrower. And then finally, there are the bosses. The first boss you go up against is the Knob, a spindly creature that crawls around on the ceiling and will attack you with his blade-like arms. The Wendigo Witch is the second boss of the game, and attacks you by hiding in the shadows and jumping out when you least expect it. Then we have the Gorgamesh, which is less of a boss and more of an overpowered enemy, which you will face a couple different times throughout the game. Then there's Colossus, a giant gluttonous monster that you defeat by throwing sticks of dynamite into it. The final boss of the game is actually not the Doctor, but rather a giant worm-like creature called the Malotesta, which can only be defeated by being shot in the mouth. Honestly, Dementium 2 is a great experience. The game runs flawlessly, it looks great, it has voice acting, and the soundtrack works really well for it too. Though because I like complaining, let's talk about the issues. First off, Dementium 2 is pretty hard, especially if you're playing on the medium difficulty, and depending on the difficulty you play on will affect how many bullets it takes to drop an enemy. Ammo and health at times are extremely sparse throughout the campaign in certain areas, so when playing on a harder difficulty, this can make combat a lot more challenging. There's also the issue where multiple times throughout the campaign, you will be locked into a certain area or room and will not be able to leave it until you take down all the enemies. And this happens a lot. And while Dementium 2 has a pretty good soundtrack to it, whenever you are in combat or have enemies nearby, the game will play the exact same melody over and over again until all the enemies are dead. One of the best mechanics that was introduced in Dementium 2 was the survival mode, which allows you to use all the weapons from the main campaign and fight off waves of enemies, which really adds a nice layer of replayability to this game. One thing about Dementium 2 that kinda disappointed me was actually its ending. Throughout the whole game, we traverse many horrors and pursue the Doctor to stop him and the monsters coming through another realm of existence. Yet, even though we defeat the final boss and do everything we were supposed to, we are merely left with this abrupt ending scene. Yeah, Dementium 2 ends on an abrupt, unexplained cliffhanger, which, to this day, there has never been a conclusive end to this series. Dementium the Ward would get remastered for the 3DS and later on home consoles too, while Dementium 2 would get an entire remake for the PC. But in my opinion, I feel like the DS versions of these games are always going to be the best ones. There's just a certain charm to these games that I feel like the newer, more modern looking versions don't have. At the end of the day, both of the Dementium games are extremely impressive for the time they came out at, especially Dementium 2. However, they are a little expensive. But...
Piracy!